Hi, Daryl Hanning here. That clicking noise you hear, if you might hear in the background, is my cat eating. Just ignore that. I thought I'd give a brief video on this game Solar Empires that I'm working on, just so you can see all the components in one fell swoop. First of all, of course, is the most obvious solar display, which starts down here with little bitty old Mercury, Venus, and Earth, deepest in the sun's gravity well, and stretches all the way out to Jupiter at the perimeter. And then there's some named asteroids in between, and of course Mars is also here. You might be able to tell, I don't know, this is pretty grainy resolution. You might be able to tell that there's dashed lines in certain concentric rings on the map. That's the asteroid belt. So you know that you can put an asteroid mine anywhere in those rings and conduct mining. There's one ring that is empty, relatively, compared to the others in relative density. It's called the Kirkwood Gap. It's where Jupiter's gravity interferes with the content of the belt, and asteroids tend to either clump on the far side towards Mars or on the closer side towards Jupiter. I don't know the math about it. You'll have to look it up if you want. Here's the planetary displays. Mercury has both orbit and surface boxes. They're color keyed, so whichever player is putting down, they put it in their colored box. And the gravity is minor for Mercury, which makes a difference in landing and taking off. Venus, abandon all hope, ye who landeth here. 700 plus degree temperatures. God, how many atmospheres? I don't know, it's like being in the deep sea on Earth as far as atmospheric pressure. And of course, a lovely content of acid in that atmosphere too. So you're not gonna put much on Venus. If you do, you can kiss it goodbye. The Earth-Luna system. This is called a planetary system because it does have one or more satellites, and so it is subject to the intra-system movement rules, which basically are cheaper and easier to do than conducting missions, and quicker too. You can do it all in 1 month, whereas missions usually are multi-month affairs. Mars, orbit and surface. This is the National Will indicator. Everybody starts at 30, and the Prestige Delta indicator. Note that Prestige can only go to -8 and +8 on any given turn. You're not going to turn your populace rabid about the space program overnight. That's the moral of this story. However, you know, if you do a couple of really cool things in one turn, pumping it up 8 is really getting the people behind you. And then you have a turn order, which you bid on from turn to turn. You get one bid. It's like Age of Steam. If you pass on your bid, then you go to the back of the bus. If you bid, you can bid less than the leading bidder, and then that'll put you in a relative position somewhere between first and last. This is the movement track. The turn track with decade and year. 2025 is where we are right now. And then the orbital movement track for the planets. Now, the only planet, or asteroid even, that consistently moves the same amount every turn is Earth, and that's because its human-imposed time frame is the fundamental unit of time measure in the game. So you end up with Earth being on an orbit that makes it move 3 spaces every turn, and lo and behold, that's a month. And so it moves 36 spaces, and it ends up right back where it started on the turn. And as you can see, there are little red dots that show every 3 months for Earth. Now you can do that for Earth because it does move the same amount every turn and always ends up in the same place at the end of the year. The other ones you can't do that with because they don't do that. They don't end up in the same place at the end of every year. So what I've done instead is put markers worth 5 for those. So if something were to get bumped, or you have a bunch of months where you don't have missions, you can just look on here and see how much it would have moved in that time increment, and then using the 5 counters just hop the planet or asteroid over to where it needs to go. Over here we have one of the player mats. This is blue, as you may have guessed. There's 8 boxes for missions. I don't even know if we need that many. I started the game with 16, dropped it down to 12, and now I'm at 8, and I'm seriously thinking I don't think anybody's ever going to need more than 6, but we'll see. And then 12 potential mine sites for the asteroid belt. Now, if you actually put a mine on one of the 4 named asteroids, such as Pallas, Vesta, Ceres, or Hygeia, I don't know. Then you have a box over here. Then you have a box over here. And note that asteroids, orbit and surface are synonymous because it takes so little energy to leave the surface. Up here we have Jupiter and its 4 Galilean moons. Okay, so back to the player mat though. You build stuff and it goes on the Earth's surface. And then these are the launch costs to get things in orbit, depending on their size. Now some things are even bigger than large, like colonies. Colonies are a double medium, which means you would spend $8 to get it up in orbit. Originally the game had boosters, both throwaway boosters and reusable boosters, with reusable boosters having a higher front-end cost and a lower payload delivery capacity, but cheaper to turn around and use, one turn after another, and usable 12 times in 12 months for that matter. But I got rid of all that because it was just time consuming, and it was just something else the players have to invest in, where the game is supposed to be about getting out into the solar system, not about getting into Earth's orbit. So once you build stuff and pay for the launch costs, you put it in your Earth orbit box. If it's something that's going to be in Earth orbit permanently, then it should probably go up here, just so everybody can see it more easily, like an orbital station or something like that. But for the time being, you launch missions from Earth, you put them in this Earth orbit box over here. You put the content of the mission in the mission box and take the counter for that mission box, and you're going to end up putting it on the map like so. Plus it'll have vector markers underneath it. This is the planning sheet, and that's actually 4 years, so it isn't quite as busy as it looks. That's 4 turns worth of planning. Initially I was doing it all on a piece of paper, and I thought, well, this is silly. I need something that organizes acquisition so people can, plan ahead. They can write it all down and then see what it totals up to and go, oh crap, I don't have enough money, I'm going to have to cut back and do something else. Okay, so up at the top you've got your initial production, and then your income based on national will referenced with your production, the year number, and then you've got all the different items, and it's just a basic, purchasing spreadsheet. Quantity times unit price equals total cost. And down here in green, the green shaded is the advanced systems, which their costs vary depending on what stage of advancement they are. So I left that blank. The user will have to write that in. And then at the bottom I've put income gain. So whatever they gain in basic income based on mines, colonies, and manufacturing plants that they've established on that turn, they can put it down here and then carry it over to the next turn. So, for example of components, this is what I got so far. This game is not short on components. We've got LTs, those are light transports. They're going to go away. They never get used. So I'm just throwing them out of the game. Medium transports, which I've had to amp up on 2 occasions just to make them somewhat worthwhile. And then of course the heavy transports, the big boys, which people buy the most in my experience. And then you got deep space transports, which I think will come in handy later in the game when you can start building them in other places, because they're good at moving stuff between orbits from, you know, say Martian orbit or Martian orbit to an asteroid, or Europa's orbit back to Earth's orbit or something like that. I'm still holding out hope for them. Orbital stations, they're basically good for prestige and getting population points off Earth. Even Earth orbit counts as off Earth. So, and victory is determined by total population points. So that's something you might want to do. And they can also build. The initial orbital stations have 2 construction points, little cross wrenches there. And then the advanced ones, here we go, have 4 construction points. Okay. Then you got capsules, command modules, landers, big landers and little landers. Big landers you need to get on Mars. You're not going to get on Mars with a little lander. It'll just go poof, and your people will be dead. Then you got deep space habitats, which are one of the first advanced systems. And what that's supposed to look like, in my crude drawing skills, is basically a cylindrical home for crew members on long-term voyages with a centrifuge in the middle, and in the back solar panels for energy. Then you have what I'm hoping at some point will be the Queen of the Skies. Although my playtesting keeps crapping out short of them being practical. Interplanetary vessels. These are things with names like the Heinlein and the Asimov and so on. And they have a built-in centrifuge, they have their own propulsion system, and they can carry a lot of crew long-term. And they have a capsule, their little parachute means that they have a capsule that can drop and be recovered either on Mars or on Earth for crew. Then you have mines, up to 4 levels of mines. Excuse the crude art. Okay. Manufacturing and colonies. And of course colonies are the big point getters as far as winning the game because of they have population. These are the vector markers that go under missions, and you can have up to 2 vector markers, and I'll show you how this works. So let's say you got a mission right there. It's in the same orbit as Pallas right now. And let's give it a realistic vector. Okay, so underneath it can be 1 or 2 counters. Now if it's 1, that's fine, then it's 1. And odds are it's going to be, if you have only 1 vector, it's going to be an orbital vector. Because any object you leave, any planet or asteroid that you leave or planetary system has its own orbital vector around the Sun, and you're going to inherit that when you leave its orbit. So let's say that A has a vector right now of 3 in counterclockwise or, you know, standard prograde solar orbit. So then he would move during mission movement 12 times a year. He would move 3. 1, 2, 1. Let's see here. Excuse me, I'm not very good at this. 1, 2, 3. That's where he would go. Okay. Now he could, if he, initiated a burn this direction downward, because he's trying to get, back down to the inner solar system, we'll say for the sake of argument. Then he would go, and the player has the option, 3 and then 1, or 1 and then 3. Now, at this particular point on the map, it doesn't really make a world of difference, but there are spots on the map where it does. For instance, well, if he goes the other way, 1, 2, 3, 1, 1, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, okay. So if he's going outward instead of inward, in this particular case, then he could go 1, 2, 3, 1, or 1, 1, 2, 3. So he could end up here or here, depending on which vector he applies first. And it's the player's choice. This is some of the flexibility that's built in the system to make it easier to rendezvous with moving objects. You're trying to hit a, well, not a bullet, but you're trying to hit a beach ball with a bullet. So that makes it easier. The other thing to keep in mind are these speed limits. And these are the minimum and maximum orbital velocity that will allow you to continue to orbit the Sun at that distance from the Sun. Now, keep in mind, these are 20 million kilometer increments. Each of these rings is 20 million kilometers across. But, so Earth has a vector of 3. We already know that from looking at the movement. So, on the turn, you launch a mission. Actually, planetary movement occurs first. So Earth would move 3. 1, 2, 3. And then the mission would launch. Okay, we'll say that's January. And then all the other planets and asteroids will move. And then during mission continuation of the next turn, well, first of all, the planet moves again. 1, 2, 3, and it leaves the mission behind. But the mission has the vector, and it now moves 3. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Well, that's kind of useless because it's basically just following the Earth around the Sun. So what you normally do is, like when you leave Earth and you're going to the outer planets, is you might kick up, you might burn and accelerate your orbital vector from 3 to 4. Okay. So you would think, well, that puts you 1, 2, 3, 4 just ahead of the Earth. You just passed the Earth, right? Well, it's not that simple. Because the speed limit where the Earth is 3. Okay? And he has just exceeded the speed limit. Now, for every movement point that you exceed the speed limit, you go out 1 ring at the end of your move. And it doesn't get applied to the mission as a vector marker. It's not permanent. It's just on that turn. Because eventually you're going to move up to another ring or down to another ring that has a different speed limit, and then you'll have to figure it differently then. So anyway, so if he goes 4, then he's actually going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and out 1. So in this way, the mission goes 1, 2, 3, 4, and out 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, and out 1. It slowly moves on out to other places. Conversely, if you took that initial vector of 3 and made it a 2, well, that's too slow to stay in Earth orbit at that point. You drop in. So you go 1, 2, and drop in. And this is basically the economic way to get to Venus and Mercury. And that's about all it's good for. Now, Venus isn't good for much of anything. Obviously, you can't go on the surface. You can't mine. You can't do any of that crap. You can, however, build an orbital station, which is for Earth prestige. So if you're really down in the dumps on prestige and you need a shot in the arm, you might put an orbital station out there. Otherwise, Venus may become completely irrelevant to the game. I haven't figured out how to improve on that. I think that's just one of the facts of life. However, Mercury is mineable, and you can put colonies on it, so that's cool. It's worth quite a few points and income. There's, I'm sure, some good ore to be had on Mercury. Colonies, because they involve people, can't be built by automated manufacturing plants. So what you have to do is you have to actually send a colony to a place to establish a colony, and not only that, but to upgrade a colony, you have to send another instance of a colony to it, which essentially doubles it, and increases it by that much more, by 5 more crew points, or remember personnel points per instance that you do that, and you can do it up to 5 times, augmenting it up to a final of 6. Each people point is approximately 5 to 10 people. So the other thing about this map, you see the different shades. Those are called the orbital regimes. And there's something I put in late in the game, just in the last few days, in fact, because it annoyed me. It kept bothering me that, okay, yeah, you can do a Hohmann transfer. You can accelerate your orbital velocity and start spiraling outwards to the outer system. But at some point, because you're going against the sun's gravity, at some point, one of two things occurs. You either do another burn to keep going at that same speed, or you lose speed. But I didn't want to have to be checking that every single turn. I thought that was going to be with the units of size, the increment, the scale of the game. Doing it every monthly turn was not going to work, because you're talking about, for instance, losing 12 points of movement in a year. That's crazy. So instead, what I decided to do was set up orbital regimes, and they correspond to the changes in speed limits. So here you see, oh, what the hey, Venus is in speed limit 3 to 4, okay, as is the next orbit out. And then I don't know if you can tell from this video, but the circle that Earth's on is on a slightly darker shade. So that tells you where the next regime is. So what happens is, after you move a mission, and you see whether or not you've exceeded or undershot the orbital vector and gone outwards or inwards as a result. You also check to see if you've crossed into a new orbital regime. And if you've crossed into a new orbital regime going outward, then you have a choice. You have to either lose 1 point of orbital velocity, 1 point of radial velocity, which is going in or out, away or towards the sun, or conduct a burn to maintain what you've got. And every time you cross into a regime, you got to do that. Now, if it was a natural object, what this would mean is that it would ultimately, if you just launch something from the Earth away from the sun with the Earth's orbital vector, it's eventually going to settle in. Well, at that point, it's going to settle into Earth orbit, right? Same orbit as Earth. But if you actually gave it some amount of acceleration, initial burn, going outwards, it might spiral out to, say, this ring here. And over the course of doing so, have that much pull on its energy towards the sun that it slows down and settles into an orbit out there. And essentially that's how you get asteroids settling into orbits and whatnot, is that they reach a point where their energy has been reduced a sufficient amount that their orbital velocity matches the current distance from the sun. Okay. The same applies in the reverse. If you go down, if you go towards the sun, then you're going to gain a point unless you do a burn to fight it. And I've even experimented with this with comets, using my rules, setting up a comet coming in at the edge of the map at, say, a 1x1 vector, like so. Okay, and they end up going like this, and then going really close to the sun and coming way back out. Now, the only problem I've seen is that with the comet, if I follow the standard movement rules of the game, it would actually go into the sun, which is not what really happens, of course. So if I do decide to put comets in, and that's kind of a cool thing because you can get lots of Chon from them, it's probably high prestige points if you can put people on it. As long as you don't send, like Bruce Willis and Steve Buscemi. Then if it moves into the space where the sun is, it just slingshots back out. You have to apply the slingshot effect to it to get it to come back out. Otherwise, all comets would plummet into the sun. So that'll work. And it's basically using the slingshot rules that I have for missions. Anything else? Oh yeah. Let's see here. This is the starting systems that you have in the game, and it shows their orbital burn capacity, depending on what payload they're carrying, how many burns they can conduct in a given month. So, for instance, this utterly worthless light transport, if it's empty, can do 2 burns. So it could change from a vector of, say, 3 to a vector of 5. And those 2 burns would take 2 of its 5 fuel, or burn capacity, if you wish. This is the cost. This is how big it is if you were to carry it with something else. It's a medium. And this is it, how many burns it takes, or fuel, however you want to look at it, to land on a place with minor gravity and moderate gravity. Now, the only place it can land, or even take off from, it's synonymous. The only way a light could take off or land on Earth or Mars, which are the moderate gravities on the board, is if you don't have any cargo on it, zero cargo. Okay, and then you got the mediums, the heavies, the deep space, all the stuff that I showed the counters for. And then down here, a reminder of how much it costs to refuel things in orbit. Reminder of launch costs, sequence of play, and then the mining and colony and manufacturing and what they do. It shows how many people they have, for instance, how many points of manufacturing they can do. Wow, that's backwards. That's so cool. That number is supposed to be a 2. What it takes to build it. If you're building it somewhere that already has a colony, for instance, and you're upgrading the colony, that's how many construction points it would take. Okay. And, on the back is nothing, but on the previous versions, and I forgot to print page 2, there's an explanation of all the icons and what they mean with diagrams. This is the National Wheel Production Matrix. So you cross-reference your current production with your national wheel, and then see how much income you get for the turn. Okay. These are the fuel markers that you put under the transports to indicate how many burns they've used already. And then I also have counters for metal and Chon. Chon, for those of you who don't know, is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. So, slushy compounds, okay? Things that are useful in synthesizing food, synthesizing chemical propellants, volatiles for other uses, and so forth. Very important. And then, of course, metal being the other thing that you want. Construction markers. When you got something under construction somewhere, you put those on to show what rate of progress you have. This is the rule book at this point. Got a great table of contents with no page numbers because they keep moving around when I change shit. But it gives the standard introduction, rundown, of all the components with lovely full color pictures, glossary of terms and game concepts, counter information conventions, kind of what you saw on the back of the which you didn't see on the back of the system status reference card, which should have been there. Okay, more iconology. Sequence of play. This is a sequence of play summary, which I'm going to have on a player 8 too. And then you go into detail as to what actually happens in each phase. Okay. And you got examples for doing planetary movement, how it works. And then after you go through the in-depth explanation of the sequence of play, then you got a section on mines, manufacturing colonies, how to build them, how they work, and so on, what the restrictions are, missions and vectors, and how they work with lovely diagrams and explanations, examples. Because I have spent a fair share of my time building user manuals, operating manuals, and programming manuals for software systems used by DoD. So this kind of thing just kind of comes naturally to me. Launching and landing, leaving in orbit, changing a mission vector, slingshots and arrow braking. Oh boy, slingshots. Yeah, that's a headache right now. Scenarios and victory conditions, which all we have right now is a beginner scenario. And that's it. And it's glorious 27 pages. And in fact, the one on the computer is already at 28 pages. Needless to say, I don't reprint it every single time I make a change because I've got an inkjet printer and that gets expensive. Let's see, is there anything else? I think that about covers it. I don't want to take up any more of your time. So if you had the patience to stick it out. Oh, wait a minute, one more thing. Two more things. We also have lunar space elevators, which cost 25, which you can build. I think that's it. Bigger heavy transports, 20 fuel points. That's it right now. Like I said, I've only done 6 years into the game because, darn it, I keep changing things, keep finding things I don't like or things that could be better. You know, God knows I've gone through these bags over here. These are previous versions of the game. All the components I've made. Yeah. And a lot, that's probably half. The other half I've thrown out because there's no point in them. There's no point in these either, but for now, just like the wife said, well, why do you keep that crap? And I said, well, it shows how many evolutions this game has gone through. It's like documenting an effort. I don't know. That's all it is. But like I said, I've only got 6 turns in right now. I'd really like to get the opportunity to go deeper, and I think I'm going to get to finally this weekend. I have a willing victim who is coming over Saturday night, and he said he's willing to do it. So we'll fire it up and see what happens, and I'll give you an update then. Thanks.